Gaia. 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 Hi, my name is Steve Morrison. Guys, I can't tell you enough how excited I have been. Almost nervous, but excited to speak to you today. The first thing I want to ask, we'll go there. The first thing I want to ask, is it possible for people to be in a crowded room and feel disconnected and lonely? Put your hand up if you say yes. And what a tragedy. And that is so sad. So from some of my background, I've been a crisis counsellor at Lifeline, and the three main phone calls that we received, and for me the most tragic, is the person that calls that said, I have spoken to a few people over the last couple of months but had a connection with nobody. So all I wanted to do tonight was tell you something about myself, and would you do something for me? Could you tell me something in reply about you? And there's a thing with being a counsellor that we don't share a lot, but there's a power in sharing. And what's missing if we're feeling alone in a crowded room is connection. And so the theme that joins us presenters together today is that connection. And what something powerful like this to bring everyone into a room as we can connect. And thank you to Kobe for doing that. The intro to say kaya, to say hello, to celebrate that culture that we often miss. I'm going to spend the next 4 hours, the next 20 minutes, speaking about how do we connect with people who are the hardest to connect with, the people that are in the most distress. As an example of distress, there is nothing okay with putting my little boy, when he's been on the planet for 6 hours, in a Collingwood scarf. A St Kilda scarf would have been better. And what you will notice is the one thing that he has in common with a Collingwood supporter is he has no teeth. Distress wreaks havoc on our functionality. And if I go back to those calls at Lifeline, people would often call up and say, I've got this problem, can you tell me how to fix it? Now, if I can connect with that person in a meaningful way, their distress will reduce and their functionality will increase, and in about 30 minutes, they will say to me, I've got a few solutions. And I will say, awesome, let's chat about that. So as our distress level goes up, our functionality goes down. And why I wanted to give this talk today was to give you as many skills as I could in 20 minutes as to how we can connect with people who are distressed and how we can reduce their distress. When I say functionality, I don't mean physical functionality. Distress does some things to the body that takes the blood and oxygen away from our brains and puts it into our muscles and into our other energy systems so we can run, we can fight, and sometimes we can freeze. Executive functioning is that part of our brain that allows us to think logically, think laterally, to have perspective, to solve problems, to think creatively, to think innovatively, to access our short and long-term memories. If we can't access our short and long-term memories, we can't access our coping strategies. So our role as caring people is to give people that access by reducing their distress. I want to give you an example of executive dysfunction. And before I put this photo up there, I will say that I'm working really closely with that person to make sure that they're okay. And no, it is not okay for me to grow my hair for 3 years. or to try to dress up with my cat like my cats. And the reason I did that, I'm not even going to go into why I did that, you don't need to know. So, if people are distressed, and by distressed I mean significantly grieving, experiencing trauma, suicidal, or some of the hardest people to reach when they're distressed are people that are in rage and anger. And here are your barriers. A perceived sense of burdensomeness. When we're trying to connect with people who are distressed, they feel that they are having a significantly negative impact on our world, our wellness, so as they don't want to connect with us. There is a perceived sense of isolation. No matter how hard I try to engage you, I don't want to put that burden on you because I feel so far away. A slide that I would normally put up is that in this process, first and foremost, if I am distressed, there is only me. And then when you come along and you try to engage me in a caring and meaningful way, there is you and me. And if I accept that invitation and you are able to do some of the things that I'm going to describe in a second, then it becomes us. And when it is us, that's when we can do the work. The antidote to distress is comfort. I've run stacks of workshops around reducing distress. And when I've said to people, without showing this slide, what is the antidote to distress, people would say relaxation. And I go, give that a try. If you've got someone that's raging, that's really, really angry, and you say, just relax. What people who are distressed need is not to relax. They need to feel soothed, nurtured, and comforted. How we do that is through compassion and empathy. I would normally ask people, who agrees with that's the right thing to do? Compassion and empathy, the two most powerful human emotions to connect. Put your hands up. The two most powerful human emotions that I've been able to use to reduce, I don't know how many people's distress. How many people that I've spoken to who have been suicidal and alone and disengaged and isolated, and those two things alone allow me to reduce that distress. Now, when I say to people, what is the definition of compassion? That's a struggle. And people would often say love, and I think that's close. And I would prompt them to say that if someone we loved was in pain, what would we want? And they're going to say, for that pain to go away. So the definition of compassion is the desire to alleviate the suffering in other people. And I want to add a couple of things to that. With selfless kindness, without needing anything in return, and without wanting anything from that person. The next thing is empathy, because I can't be compassionate without being empathetic. If I had a superpower, my superpower would be empathy. And what I mean by that is that I am deeply fascinated with the experience of what it is like for someone else to be in their world. And that might be something low-key. Is the blue that I see the same blue that you see? Is the sound that I hear the same sound that you hear? And is the pain that you feel the same pain that I feel? I currently work in a school as a school counsellor, and I am often saying to the kids that I'm counselling, let me know what it's like to be you. Not very often they say it's awesome because they are teenagers. So the definition of empathy, if compassion is the desire to alleviate the suffering in others, empathy is the desire to understand the suffering of others in a kind and selfless way. I want to speak a little bit about anger now. I used to work in hospitality. So I've worked in mental health for about 15 years. And when I left school, I worked in hospitality. And when I worked in hospitality, I did some security work. And you will go, that makes sense because Steve is massive. Or you go, Steve could probably talk pretty well. So I was working one night at a club in Canberra, and it was about 3 a.m. The club closes in 2 hours, and it was a good night. Everything was running pretty smoothly. And all of a sudden, someone stands out of the up inside the club and runs out. And one person does that, 2 people do that, the rest of the club runs out. And I go, my finish at 5 a.m. probably looks more like finishing at 8 o'clock in the morning, depending on what's going on out in the car park. So I wander out there slowly. And there's a huge crowd of people, and what I notice is there's a guy in the car park screaming. He's holding a brick, he's got blood on his hands, and he's smashing the brick into the ground, and he's smashing the brick into cars. And I'm thinking, jeepers, something real bad's happened. So I'm walking through the crowd, and I get stopped when I get to the front by, I think, one of his friends, and the friend says, "Where are you going?" And I go, "I'm going to go and have a conversation with him." And they go, "Nah, we don't talk to him when he's like that." Who in the room's felt angry before? Anger is a really misunderstood emotion where on the one hand, we want to be left alone, and I believe primarily because people are scared of anger and don't understand it. And I think, and I'm going to talk about the 3 drivers of anger that people need to be connected with when they're angry to decrease that distress so they don't do anything harmful for themselves or other people. And he was doing both. So I walk past this crowd, walk towards the guy, he looks at me and he goes, "Human target, this is better than cars and asphalt." Holds the brick up and goes, "What do you want?" And I said, "What's happened?" And he said, "What do you care?" And I said, "Whatever's happened must have been really painful." And as I'm talking, the brick's going down, and he says to me, "I got a text message that I shouldn't have got." I said, "What did it say?" He said, "It was from my girlfriend telling someone else that I wasn't home and that they could come around." And I said, "That sucks." And he dropped the brick and he crumpled down into a ball and started crying. His friends that stopped me from going over there ran over and gave him a hug. Another story, I was going for a walk in a suburb quite close to this, and I was just walking down the street and a guy comes crashing out of his house. Had a baseball bat and a really scary dog, Shih Tzu or something. He says to me, the baseball bat, dog's here, and he's holding it, looking really agitated. "Have you been ringing my doorbell?" I said, "No, what's going on?" He said, "My doorbell hasn't stopped ringing for the last 3 days." In my head, I was thinking, gee, you got to get that fixed. I said to him, "That's awful. Can you still hear it ringing now?" He said, "Yes." I said, "So I imagine over the last 3 days you haven't slept and all you've heard is this doorbell ringing. It must be driving you crazy." He goes, "It is. And if you find out who's doing it, tell them to stop," and charged back into his house. 2 things. I made a phone call to the police to ask them to go around and do a welfare check because he was probably having auditory hallucinations. And if that was the case, that is enough to cause someone significant distress and therefore some harm. Second thing, if I responded to his emotional state of are you ringing my doorbell? And I go, no, I'm not. Then we're going to get some sort of conflict. But the message isn't anger. The message is connect with the pain. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. The third story, and last on anger. I pulled up at a service station in rural Western Australia once, and I had a friend with me who knows me pretty well, and I saw just beside the service station there was a house and there's a fence. There was a guy backed up against the fence with his arm folded like this, and there was a woman standing in front of him screaming at him, pointing in his face. He wasn't saying anything. She's pointing in his face. She's saying super nasty stuff. And I've turned to my person that was sitting next to me in the car, and they said to me, don't go over there. I said, I'll see you in a second. So I went for a walk over there, right? And I say to the guy, not the woman, I say to the guy, hi mate, what's going on? In kind of that tone, enough to get his attention. And the reason I wanted to get his attention, because I know if people are angry and they can't tell you, so they can't use their words, they will show you. And if he's backed up against the fence, I'm like, oh, this is not looking very good. So I go, hey mate, what's going on? He looks at me going, oh yes, a male target. I'm going to smash this guy. I said, that sucks. And he goes, yeah. And I go, what's happened? She's walking off at this stage, right? And I might be a little bit crass here. She's walking off, starts abusing me, going, you homo, small, fill in the blank, homo, small, white trash, this and that. I was like, wow, you're perceptive. How did you know that stuff? And so I say to the guy, I said, what's happened? He says to me, I've never hit her. I go, that's really important to you, right? He goes, yeah. I go, what caused that? He said, her drug and alcohol use. I said, how are you doing? He goes, I'm struggling with that too. We had a chat for about 15 minutes. Really interesting guy. I would love to know the outcomes to all these stories, but I don't. Just that I hope that with that intervention, that distress level goes down and that gives him a break to process, regather, come back and re-enter into that. So here's a little bit more about anger. Anger is a secondary emotion. It cannot come first. It has to be based on fear. I am scared, therefore I need to protect myself or someone else. Shame. I am not worthy, I don't deserve love, care and support, or I am weak, or pain. I am hurting, I can't deal, and I don't want to hear that right now. If you can connect with that, anger goes away. I've got about 50 more anger stories that I could tell. Have I made my point? Yeah. Cool. The reason I use anger as an example of distress and how to de-escalate distress, I could have chosen grief and loss, I could have chosen suicide, but anger is the prickliest one. But often the one that resonates the strongest with us, that if we can decrease that distress, that anger goes away, therefore the harm goes away. And same is true. I have a minute, I'm going to do a quick something on suicide. I've done suicide, crisis intervention and suicide intervention has been what I've done the most of. And inevitably, someone in a group would say, why do people die by suicide? And I say, pain. Pain causes suicide. People don't want to die. It's not like I wake up in the morning and go, that sounds like a good idea. It's not even that I go, I'm in so much pain right now, if I had a cure versus if I still killed myself, I would still kill myself. It's not the case. So if we can decrease that pain and distress, the harm goes away. Willing, able and available. To be a caring person in the community, you need to be willing, able and available. I see a really kind, caring and compassionate audience. So I think you're all willing. I know we're relatively time poor, but we all have a bit of time. So I think you are available sometimes. It's the ability thing where people get stuck. I've seen on a number of occasions people in the community who are devastated and distressed, and thousands of people walk past them. And I don't think it's because they don't care. I think it's because they're scared of what to say, what will happen, and if I don't know what to say, I choose not to do anything at all and hope someone else will. So that my talk today was literally to hopefully empower you all to be more able. And I want to leave you with this quote. The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose is to give it away. A lovely gift that we can all give is kindness, care and compassion. And the meaning of that is to use it in action. Thank you very much.